Tokyo, November 1943. Rain streaks down the windows of the Naval Ministry building in Kasumigaseki. Inside a windowless conference room on the third floor, 7 men in crisp Imperial Japanese Navy uniforms sit motionless around a polished table. The overhead light hums. No one speaks. Before them lie scattered intelligence reports, freshly translated from intercepted American documents. The papers are marked with red stamps: urgent, classified, verified. One admiral, Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, holds a single sheet in both hands. His knuckles are white. The numbers typed across the page are simple, clear, impossible to misunderstand. In the past 6 months, the United States Navy has graduated 10,800 new combat pilots. The Army Air Forces trained 14,500 more. That is 25,300 aviators in half a year. Fukudome's eyes move to a second column. Japanese naval aviation graduated 580 pilots in the same period. He sets the paper down slowly. Another officer reaches for it, reads it, says nothing. The silence stretches. Outside, Tokyo bustles in the rain, unaware that in this room, 7 men have just seen the future of the war. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. 18 months later, the Pacific Ocean is a graveyard of ships and the sky a theater of violence. Japan's early victories seemed unstoppable. Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, Singapore, Java, Burma. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier strike force moved like a scalpel across the Pacific, cutting deep into Allied defenses. At the heart of that dominance were the pilots. Not just any pilots. These were men forged over years, warriors trained in a system that valued perfection, endurance, and sacrifice above all. The Zero fighter, the Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber, the Aichi D-3A dive bomber. These were flown by aviators who began their journey as teenagers and emerged, if they survived, as instruments of war. The training pipeline was brutal. Cadets entered at 15 or 16. They spent 2 years in rigorous academic study, physical conditioning, and basic flight instruction. Only a fraction passed. Those who did moved to advanced training: carrier landings, formation flying, gunnery, navigation over open ocean. By the time a pilot earned his wings and was assigned to a fleet carrier, he had accumulated over 700 flight hours. He could land on a pitching deck in darkness. He could navigate by stars alone. He knew his aircraft like his own breath. This was not mass production. This was art. This was the samurai spirit translated into modern warfare. Japan's Naval Aviation Corps in 1941 numbered roughly 3,500 highly trained pilots. They were considered the finest in the world, and their performance in the war's opening months proved it. At Pearl Harbor, they sank battleships. At the Indian Ocean raid, they destroyed British carriers. In the Java Sea, they ruled the skies. But war is attrition. Every sortie risked loss. Every carrier battle bled experience. And Japan's system was not designed to replace losses quickly. The philosophy was qualitative, not quantitative. Train fewer men to a higher standard. Make each pilot irreplaceable. It worked brilliantly until the moment it didn't. By mid-1942, cracks appeared. The Battle of the Coral Sea in May saw the carrier Shoho sunk and dozens of aircrew lost. A month later, Midway shattered the illusion of invincibility. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, went to the bottom. With them died over 200 of Japan's best pilots. The carriers could theoretically be replaced, given time and resources. The pilots could not. The training system could not scale. It was never designed to. As 1942 bled into 1943, Japan fought desperate battles at Guadalcanal, in the Solomons, over Rabaul. Every engagement cost more aircrew. Replacements arrived slowly, often with only 300 hours of flight time, half what their predecessors had. Quality declined. Losses mounted. And across the Pacific, in a nation whose industrial capacity Japan had gravely underestimated, a different philosophy took root. The United States in 1941 was not a warrior nation. Its peacetime military ranked 17th in the world, behind Romania. The Army Air Corps had fewer than 2,500 pilots. The Navy and Marines combined had around 5,000. Aircraft production was modest. Training infrastructure was scattered. But America had something Japan did not: a vast industrial base, a culture of mass production, and a population that, once committed, could mobilize on a scale the world had never seen. Within weeks of Pearl Harbor, the transformation began. Congress authorized funding that would have seemed insane a year earlier. Airfields sprouted across the American South and Southwest. Flat, open land, perfect for flight training. Texas, Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia. These states became factories for aviators. Existing facilities expanded overnight. New ones appeared in months. The Navy established training stations at Pensacola, Corpus Christi, Jacksonville. The Army Air Forces built bases at places that had been cattle ranches and cotton fields: Randolph, Maxwell, Luke, Williams, Thunderbird. Civilian flight schools were contracted to provide primary training. Aircraft manufacturers retooled. Factories that once built cars now built trainers: Stearman PT-17s, Vultee BT-13s, North American AT-6 Texans. These were not frontline fighters. They were teaching machines, simple, rugged, forgiving. Thousands rolled off assembly lines. By early 1942, the system was operational. By mid-1942, it was producing pilots at a rate Japan could not fathom. The American approach was fundamentally different. Where Japan sought perfection, America sought volume. Where Japan trained a man for 2 years, America trained him for 9 months. Where Japan required 700 hours before carrier qualification, America sent pilots to combat with 300, sometimes less. Critics called it reckless. Commanders called it necessary. The philosophy was simple: train enough pilots that losses become acceptable, that replacements are always available, that the enemy cannot win a war of attrition. It was industrial logic applied to human beings. Ford and General Motors and Boeing had taught America how to mass-produce complex machines with interchangeable parts. Now the military applied that thinking to aircrew. Standardize the curriculum. Streamline the process. Eliminate inefficiencies. Use simulators, gunnery ranges, mock carriers on land. Teach the essentials. Skip the refinements. Get them winged, get them operational, get them into the fight. If they survived their first 10 missions, they learned more than any school could teach. If they didn't, there were 10 more graduating next week. It sounded cold. It was cold, but it worked. By the end of 1942, American training programs were graduating 2,000 pilots per month. By mid-1943, that number was over 4,000. The Navy alone was producing more pilots in a month than Japan could train in 6. And this was not a surge that would fade. The infrastructure was built. The instructors were trained. The pipeline was full and flowing. By late 1943, the United States had not just closed the gap Japan had opened at Pearl Harbor. It had reversed it entirely. American carriers in the Pacific now had replacement pilots waiting in reserve pools. Japan's carriers, the few that remained, often sailed with partially filled air groups. The mathematics were becoming undeniable. And in Tokyo, intelligence officers tasked with tracking enemy capabilities began to compile reports that their superiors did not want to believe. The numbers were too stark, the implications too grim. But numbers do not lie. And by November 1943, those numbers arrived on the desks of men who could no longer ignore them. Warrant Officer Saburo Sakai sits in the cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0 on the deck of the carrier Taiho. It is June 1944. He has been flying for nearly 4 years. He entered training in 1937 when he was 17 years old. He remembers the cold barracks, the instructors who struck cadets for mistakes, the endless drills. He remembers his first solo flight, the terror and exhilaration. He remembers carrier qualifications, the deck rising and falling, the margin for error measured in feet. By the time he flew his first combat mission in China, he had 800 hours. He was 20 years old and already a veteran. Now he is 24. He has over 3,000 flight hours. He has survived battles that killed better pilots. He knows every vibration of his Zero, every sound the engine makes, every limit of its performance envelope. He can dogfight by instinct, lead a target without thinking, nurse a damaged aircraft home on fumes. He is irreplaceable, and he knows it. Around him on the carrier deck are younger pilots. Some have 200 hours, some less. They look at him with reverence and fear. They know that most of them will die in their first engagement. The training system that forged Sakai no longer exists. The schools are still there, but the time has been cut, the standards lowered, the fuel rationed. New pilots arrive at frontline units barely able to land on a carrier. They do not know how to navigate by dead reckoning. They have never flown in weather. Their gunnery is poor, and there are so few of them. Japan cannot replace its losses. Every veteran lost is a blow the nation cannot recover from. Sakai understands this. He sees it in the faces of his squadron mates, in the empty bunks, in the dwindling numbers at morning briefings. The war is eating Japan's aircrew faster than the empire can grow them. And across the ocean, the enemy is doing something Japan cannot comprehend. Building pilots like they build tanks. Ensign James Flatley arrives at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi in January 1943. He is 20 years old, fresh from college. He has never flown an airplane. 6 months later, he has his wings. The transformation is mechanical, efficient, relentless. Primary training lasts 8 weeks. He flies the N-3N biplane, learning basic maneuvers, stalls, spins, landings. Instructors push him through a checklist of skills. There is no time for artistry. Master the task, move to the next. Intermediate training is another 8 weeks. He transitions to the SNJ Texan, a more powerful aircraft. He learns formation flying, navigation, radio procedures. He flies cross-country missions, practices forced landings, does night flights. The pace is exhausting. Some cadets wash out, most continue. Advanced training is 12 weeks. Flatley selects fighters. He flies the F-4F Wildcat, learns gunnery on toe sleeves, practices dogfighting against other cadets. He does carrier qualifications on USS Wolverine, a converted paddle steamer on Lake Michigan. 6 landings, that is the requirement. He makes them all. In September 1943, he is commissioned. By October, he is assigned to VF-18, a fighter squadron aboard USS Bunker Hill. By November, he is in the Pacific. He has 320 flight hours. In Japan's system, he would still be in basic training. In America's system, he is combat-ready. Is he as skilled as Saburo Sakai? No, not even close. But there are 10,000 more like him, and 10,000 more coming next year. That is the difference. America is not trying to create samurai. America is creating an avalanche. The Link trainer sits in a hangar at Pensacola. It is a squat blue box mounted on a pedestal, shaped like an airplane cockpit. Inside, a cadet wears a hood that blocks all outside vision. He grips the stick and rudder pedals. The trainer tilts and pitches, simulating flight. Instruments glow in front of him. He must fly by gauges alone. Altitude, airspeed, heading, turn coordinator. Outside, an instructor watches a mechanical arm trace the cadet's flight path on a table. If the cadet deviates, the instructor notes it. The Link trainer was invented in the 1930s, but it was the war that made it essential. By 1943, the U.S. military operates over 10,000 of them. Pilots log hours in the trainer before they ever leave the ground. They learn instrument flying, navigation, emergency procedures. It saves fuel, it saves aircraft, it saves lives. Japan has no equivalent. Japanese pilots train in actual aircraft from the start. Fuel shortages by 1943 mean they fly less, learn slower, arrive at combat units underprepared. America also has gunnery ranges equipped with camera guns. Pilots fire at towed targets. The camera records where their bullets would have gone. Instructors review the film, correct mistakes, repeat the drill. Japan trains gunnery over the ocean, expending live ammunition it can barely afford to spare. America has ground schools with lectures, films, briefings. Pilots learn aircraft recognition, tactics, survival skills. The curriculum is standardized. Every pilot gets the same training. Japan's system relies on apprenticeship, veterans teaching newcomers in the fleet. But the veterans are dying. The infrastructure gap is invisible but decisive. America has turned pilot training into an industrial process. Japan still treats it as a craft. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto knew. He knew before Pearl Harbor. He had lived in America. He had studied at Harvard. He had served as a naval attaché in Washington. He had seen the factories, the oil fields, the sprawling cities. He had warned the Imperial General Staff that Japan could not win a long war against the United States. His famous words were prophetic. "I shall run wild for 6 months, but after that, I have no confidence." He planned Pearl Harbor not because he believed it would defeat America, but because he hoped it would shock America into negotiating peace. It did not, and by the time Yamamoto died in April 1943, shot down over Bougainville, his worst fears were coming true. Other Japanese leaders did not share his realism. They believed in spirit, in Yamato Damashi, the soul of Japan. They believed that discipline and sacrifice could overcome material disadvantage. They looked at the early victories and convinced themselves that American pilots were soft, poorly trained, unwilling to die for their cause. This was a fatal miscalculation. American leadership understood war as production. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, and General Henry Hap Arnold, Commander of the Army Air Forces, saw the conflict as a problem of logistics and output. Build more ships, train more pilots, produce more aircraft than the enemy can destroy. Overwhelm them not with individual brilliance, but with sheer weight of numbers. It was not a romantic vision of war. It was mathematics. And mathematics favored the side with more resources, more infrastructure, more willingness to treat human beings as renewable assets. By 1943, that difference in philosophy was reflected in every theater. Japan sent its best pilots into battle over and over until they died. America rotated its pilots home after a set number of missions, used them as instructors, then sent them back. Japan hoarded its veterans until there were none left. America built a system that turned veterans into force multipliers. Consider the numbers coldly. January 1942. Japan has approximately 3,500 combat-ready naval aviators. The United States has roughly 5,000 across all services. By January 1943, Japan has lost 2,800 pilots killed or permanently disabled. It has trained 1,900 replacements. Its total strength is 2,600. The quality of those 2,600 is significantly lower than the 3,500 a year earlier. The United States has lost 1,200 pilots in the Pacific. It has trained 22,000 replacements. Its total strength is 25,800. The quality is lower than pre-war standards, but improving rapidly as survivors gain experience. By January 1944, Japan has lost another 1,800 pilots. It has trained 1,200 more. Its strength is 2,000. Many of these have under 200 flight hours. The United States has lost 2,000 pilots in the Pacific. It has trained another 50,000. Its strength is over 73,000. Many have combat experience. Reserves are deep. This is not war. This is extinction by arithmetic. Every major engagement, Coral Sea, Midway, Guadalcanal, the Solomons, Rabaul, bleeds Japan at a rate it cannot sustain. The United States absorbs losses that would cripple Japan and returns stronger. By late 1943, Japanese commanders understand this intellectually, but emotionally it is incomprehensible. How can a nation produce pilots the way it produces bullets? How can training programs grow faster than combat consumes them? The answer is industrial capacity married to strategic vision. Japan built an exquisite sword. America built a factory that produced 10,000 swords per month. The sword is beautiful. The factory is unstoppable. Vice Admiral Fukudome stares at the report long after the meeting ends. He is a staff officer, a planner, a man who deals in facts. He has fought bureaucracy and tradition to modernize the Navy. He helped design the war plan for the southern expansion. He believed Japan could seize the resources it needed and defend them long enough to force a negotiated peace. Now the numbers on this page tell him that belief was fantasy. 25,300 American pilots trained in 6 months. His own service, the Imperial Japanese Navy, trained 580 in the same period. The ratio is not 2-to-1 or even 5-to-1. It is 43-to-1. Even accounting for quality differences, the disparity is crushing. He thinks of the carriers under construction, the new aircraft designs being tested. What good are they without pilots? You cannot fly an aircraft with spirit alone. He thinks of the young men arriving at air groups with 150 hours of training, boys who do not know how to escape a spin, who cannot navigate without landmarks, who die on their first mission. He thinks of squadron commanders begging for more time to train replacements and being told there is no time, no fuel, no aircraft to spare. He thinks of Yamamoto's warnings, dismissed as defeatism. He thinks of the politicians and generals who promised that Japanese willpower would overcome American industry, and he feels something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, exactly. Certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when you see a mathematical proof and understand that the conclusion is unavoidable. Japan has already lost the war. The fighting will continue. Men will die. Ships will sink. Cities will burn. But the outcome is no longer in doubt. It was decided not on any battlefield, but in the quiet classrooms and dusty airfields of Texas, Florida, Arizona. It was decided when America chose mass production over craftsmanship. Fukudome folds the report and places it in his briefcase. Tomorrow he will attend another meeting. He will present plans for operations that he knows cannot succeed. He will do his duty, but he will carry this knowledge like a stone. The intelligence report did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. It accumulated over weeks in the autumn of 1943, pieced together by analysts in the 3rd Section of the Naval General Staff, the bureau responsible for tracking enemy capabilities. The sources were fragmentary but consistent. Intercepted radio transmissions, reports from neutral diplomats, captured documents from downed aircraft, reconnaissance photographs of American air bases. Each piece alone meant little. Together, they formed a picture that could not be ignored. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most brilliant air staff officers and an architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, was among the first to see the full compilation. He read it in his small office in the Ministry Building on a gray afternoon in early November. He read it twice. Then he requested a meeting with Admiral Fukudome. By November 12th, the report sat on the desks of 7 senior naval aviation officers. The meeting convened at 1400 hours. No formal agenda. The report itself was the agenda. Fukudome opened with a simple statement. "We must understand what we are facing." He read the key figures aloud. American pilot production in the 6 months from April to September 1943, Navy 10,800, Army Air Forces 14,500, total 25,300. Japanese production in the same period, Navy 580, Army perhaps 900, total 1,480. The gap was not narrowing. It was widening. Monthly graduation rates showed the trend clearly. In April, the United States graduated 3,800 pilots. By September, that number was 4,600. Japan's numbers had actually declined, from 120 per month to fewer than 100. Fuel shortages, aircraft shortages, instructor shortages. The training pipeline was starving. One officer, Rear Admiral Takejiro Onishi, asked the obvious question. Could these numbers be inflated? Disinformation? Genda shook his head. He had cross-referenced the pilot numbers with American aircraft production figures, which were harder to fake. In 1943, the United States produced over 85,000 military aircraft. Japan produced 16,000. The ratio matched the pilot ratio almost exactly. It was real. Another officer suggested that American training standards must be abysmal, that their pilots must be poorly prepared. Fukudome did not argue. He simply noted that poorly prepared pilots flying superior numbers would still overwhelm elite pilots in insufficient numbers. And American pilots were not static. Those who survived gained experience quickly. The discussion lasted 2 hours. It circled the same grim arithmetic from different angles. No one raised their voice. There were no arguments, just a slow, methodical acceptance of what the numbers meant. Japan could not replace its pilot losses. America could replace losses and build a surplus. Japan's pilot quality was declining. America's was stabilizing and would soon improve. Japan's training infrastructure was contracting. America's was still expanding. The conclusion wrote itself. In any prolonged conflict, Japan would lose air superiority. Without air superiority, the fleet could not operate. Without the fleet, the defensive perimeter would collapse. Without the perimeter, the home islands would be exposed. The logic was inescapable. The meeting ended without decisions. There were no decisions to make. Strategy is built on capabilities, and capabilities are built on resources. Japan did not have the resources to match American pilot production. It did not have the fuel, the aircraft, the instructors, the time. Genda proposed accelerating the training schedule further, cutting it from the current 12 months to 6. Fukudome asked how that would help. Pilots with 6 months training would die even faster than pilots with 12 months. You would simply be feeding them into the fire at a higher rate. The losses would not decrease. The quality collapse would accelerate. Onishi suggested prioritizing quality over quantity, returning to the pre-war standards, training fewer pilots, but training them thoroughly. Fukudome pointed out that this would reduce output even further. Japan was already being outnumbered 40-1 in pilot production. Focusing on quality would make it 60-1, 80-1. At a certain point, quality cannot compensate for quantity. Someone mentioned kamikaze tactics, turning the pilot into a guided missile, reducing the training requirement to simply flying the aircraft to the target. The room fell silent. It was November 1943. The official adoption of organized kamikaze attacks was still a year away, but the idea was already circulating in the darker corners of staff planning. No one spoke in favor. No one spoke against. The silence was answer enough. Desperation was not yet policy, but it was waiting in the wings. Fukudome closed the meeting with instructions to compile a full strategic assessment for the Naval General Staff. The report would be classified secret, limited distribution. It would lay out the pilot production disparity and its implications for operations in 1944. He did not expect it to change anything. Plans were already in motion. Operation Z, the defense of the Marianas and the Philippine Sea. The combined fleet would sortie with every available carrier. They would seek a decisive battle. They would destroy the American carrier force and buy time. But time for what? Time to train pilots they did not have? Time to build aircraft from resources they could not access? Fukudome did not say this aloud. He dismissed the meeting and returned to his office. That evening, he wrote in his private journal, a rare habit for a man who generally avoided reflection. The entry was brief. Today we calculated the enemy's strength in pilots. The numbers are worse than we feared. I do not see how we can prevail. But we will fight because there is no alternative. History will judge whether courage was enough. It was not dramatics. It was epitaph. The Imperial Japanese Navy had 7 months left as an effective fighting force. The pilots who would destroy it were already in training, scattered across American bases, most of them still teenagers, learning to fly in blue Texas skies, unaware that they were the instruments of a mathematical inevitability. In Tokyo, the Admirals knew, and they prepared for battles they understood they could not win. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea, west of the Mariana Islands. The sky is clear, the ocean vast and blue. At 0830 hours, Japanese search planes locate the American carrier task force. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the first mobile fleet from the carrier Taiho, orders the attack. He has 9 carriers. He launches 373 aircraft in 4 waves. His pilots are young. Most have fewer than 200 flight hours. Many have never seen combat. They fly toward the American fleet in formations that drift apart. Navigation is uncertain. Communication is poor. 60 miles out, they meet the American Combat Air Patrol. The Americans have early warning from radar. They have time to position their fighters. They have 450 F-6F Hellcats aloft, flown by pilots with better training, better aircraft, and a tactical advantage. What follows is not a battle. It is a massacre. The first Japanese wave loses 42 aircraft out of 69. The second wave loses 98 out of 130. The third wave, 49 out of 47. The fourth wave loses 73 out of 82. By the end of the day, Japan has lost 330 aircraft. American losses total 30. American pilots will later call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The name is cruel and accurate. Japanese aircraft fall from the sky in flames. Pilots bail out into the ocean. Some are rescued. Most are not. The formations that were supposed to strike the American carriers never reach them. Those that do inflict negligible damage, 1 bomb hit on the battleship South Dakota. That is all. The Americans lose 2 carriers that day, but not to Japanese aircraft. Submarines sink Taiho and Shokaku. By nightfall, Ozawa's fleet is shattered. He has fewer than 100 operational aircraft left. The American carriers are untouched, their air groups nearly intact. The battle is over. The Marianas are lost. Saipan will fall within a month. With Saipan goes the defensive perimeter Japan bled to create. And with the perimeter goes any hope of defending the home islands. The Turkey Shoot is not an anomaly. It is the numbers from November 1943 made manifest. It is the harvest of industrial production. Those 2,300 American pilots trained in 6 months, many of them are here in the cockpits of Hellcats and Corsairs, turning Japanese aircraft into debris. They are not all skilled, but there are so many of them that skill becomes secondary. They swarm, they overwhelm, they kill. By October 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier aviation is effectively extinct. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the 4 remaining carriers, Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, Chiyoda, serve as decoys. They have fewer than 100 aircraft among them, and many of those are piloted by instructors pulled from training schools. The carriers lure Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet north, while Japanese battleships attempt to destroy the invasion force at Leyte. The plan fails. All 4 carriers are sunk. The pilots die. The survivors return to Japan with no carriers to land on. By December, Japan has abandoned conventional naval aviation. There are no trained pilots left. The training schools have been emptied to fill combat losses. New recruits receive barely a month of instruction, just enough to take off and fly in a straight line. They are not being trained to fight. They are being trained to die. The kamikaze corps is formalized. Vice Admiral Onishi, who sat silent in that November 1943 meeting, now commands the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines. He organizes the first official kamikaze units in October 1944. The pilots are volunteers, though what choice means in that context is debatable. They are given just enough training to reach a target. Some have 50 hours of flight time. Some have less. They do not learn to dogfight or evade or navigate home. They learn to aim. Onishi does not pretend this is strategy. It is desperation formalized. When he explains the kamikaze concept to his staff, he says, "Our country is in grave danger. The enemy has overwhelming material superiority. We must hit them with our spirit." Spirit. The word that Japanese leadership had relied on when the numbers stopped making sense. The kamikazes sink ships. USS St. Lo, an escort carrier, goes down after a kamikaze strike on October 25th. Other vessels are damaged. But the American fleet is too large, the defenses too strong. For every ship sunk, 10 more arrive. For every American pilot killed, 50 more graduate. The mathematics have not changed. By early 1945, Japan is launching kamikaze attacks with over 1,000 aircraft at a time, scraping together every plane that can still fly, piloted by boys who should still be in school. At Okinawa, between April and June, kamikazes sink 36 American ships and damage 368 more. It is the most destructive kamikaze campaign of the war. It is also futile. The American fleet remains. The invasion proceeds, and the cost to Japan is the final destruction of its air forces. The boys who die at Okinawa are the last generation. There is no one left to train. The schools are empty. The fuel is gone. The aircraft factories are rubble under American bombs. By August 1945, when the atomic bombs fall, Japan has perhaps 5,000 aircraft remaining, most of them hidden, unflyable, reserved for a final suicidal defense of the home islands that never comes. In 1941, Japan had the finest naval aviators in the world. In 1945, it has none. The difference is arithmetic. The difference is November 1943, a quiet room in Tokyo, 7 men reading a report and understanding that the war was already over. Wars are not won by courage alone. They are won by logistics, by production, by the cold mathematics of resources and replacement rates. The Japanese admirals who sat in silence that November afternoon understood this, even if they could not admit it publicly. They had built a military philosophy around quality, discipline, the warrior elite. They had created aviators who were works of art. And they watched that philosophy shatter against the assembly line logic of American mass production. The moment they calculated the pilot training gap was the moment the Pacific War's outcome became inevitable. Everything that followed, the Turkey Shoot, the kamikazes, the burning cities, was aftermath. History remembers the battles, the explosions, the ships sinking in flames. But the true turning points are often quieter. A room in Tokyo, a stack of papers, a set of numbers that cannot be argued with. Japan lost the Pacific War not because its pilots lacked courage or skill. It lost because it could not produce them fast enough to replace the dead. America did not win because its pilots were better. It won because it treated them as renewable resources and built a system to manufacture them at industrial scale. There is something inhuman in that calculation, something profoundly modern. War had become a matter of production quotas and graduation rates. The samurai spirit met the factory floor, and the factory floor won. In the decades since, military theorists have studied that disparity. They have written papers on pilot training pipelines, on the strategic value of quantity versus quality. The lessons are taught at staff colleges. The numbers are cited in debates over defense spending. But the human cost is often forgotten. 25,000 American boys trained in 6 months. How many survived the war? How many came home? And the 580 Japanese boys trained in that same period, how many lived to see 1945? The silence in that Tokyo conference room was not just the silence of defeat. It was the silence of men realizing they had sent a generation to die in a war that mathematics had already decided. That silence echoes still.